Welcome back to season 3. And I didn't know if this would even come. Uh, for those who are new here, this is a Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. If I'm being real, y'all, I never thought this would come. This would be the day where I would be saying that we are in the third season of this podcast. When I started Liberation Lab, I did not believe that my voice belonged. I thought that, if anything, I would only amplify the voices of those who have come to be an inspiration to me. I didn't think I had anything to add to the conversation of educational justice. And over the time since this has started, I've learned a lot. I've learned that followers don't equal impact. And I'm not saying that to shade anyone with more followers on social media than myself. I'm saying that I built a platform that had 14,000 people follow me, which is a lot to say, for some principal in New Jersey. But what I recognized was that for someone who's a recovering people pleaser, um, for someone who is working on being the best version of themselves, that likes and follower counts don't mean that you're actually making the impact that you desire. My life and my leadership are more intertwined. And so, shout out to therapy. I am on a different path of putting out what I believe is vital and aligns with where I believe my voice belongs in this world of educational justice. And I think the way that I want to begin our time together on this podcast is to say that the biggest lesson that I've learned is that liberation does not happen, does not occur, is not without the presence of resistance. That means that we will find ourselves in moments where what we didn't think would happen happened. That means we'll find ourselves in moments where you thought we might be better. And so the theme of this season is teaching for justice and resistance. I can think of no better way than to begin this particular episode on this particular day than with the person behind me, Uncle Jimmy, James Baldwin. James Baldwin, in his talk to teachers, begins with where I want to begin today, and that is he acknowledges that we are in a dangerous time. And in his talk to teachers, he states that the danger we would presume is from Khrushchev, who was the Soviet Union's leader at the time. But he counteracts that and says, no, the danger isn't outside. The danger is within American society itself. I would even add that the danger of American society, the danger being within American society, starts with the danger that exists within every single one of us. In this moment, we run the risk of allowing despair, anger, sadness to rob us of reflection and hope. And as educators, we must always be students first. I believe that one of the biggest lessons that America has taught us again and again is that fear and a commitment to comfort will always be the enemy of progress. And before we nod our heads in approval of that fact, think about how the same thing can be true of us. How often have we been guilty of laughing off an uncomfortable joke or statement and never challenging deficit ideology when we see it? How often have we remained silent when we should have spoken up? How often have we been guilty of denying the support that we expected in this election cycle? If anything, we have learned that education itself has not produced the critical thought and the better questions that we thought we had produced. Education has not produced folks who will critique society in ways that we had hoped. In that same talk to teachers, Baldwin writes that the purpose of education is to create a person with the ability to look at the world for themselves, to ask questions of the universe, and to learn to live with those questions. And I think that as I reflect on that, as I think on that, I ask of myself, and I hope that you ask of yourself, have I endangered the betterment of society by stifling questions in favor of obedience? Have I stifled critical thought in favor of compliance because it was easier for me to have folks that comply, to have students that comply? Baldwin states in that same piece that a responsible person must try to examine society to try to change it and fight it no matter the risk. When you think about the ways in which folks are going to inevitably on your timeline, even as you probably see this video, dig their heels in, state things that are hard to hear, hard to reckon with, I think it's incumbent upon us to engage in a deep reflection about this. What lessons can we learn here? Well, as I've thought about it and continue to think about it, these are unfinished thoughts in the moment, if you will. Trump's coming second term as president underscores the indictment on education for me. The US has continued to be held up as this paragon of virtue, liberty, justice, and victory. We continue to leave out the narratives of indigenous brothers and sisters. So much so that when I choose to learn more, I have to supplement, go outside of the curriculum that is handed to learn more about my indigenous brothers and sisters and the stories that we've been told, to think critically about the things that we've been told. As an example, Buffalo Bill. I've heard the name, I've heard the stories, and every time I've heard the story, he's hailed as some champion, but he literally annihilated buffalo to eradicate indigenous folk. But he's hailed as a hero. We uproot the narratives of enslaved Africans, of enslaved folk. When we tell the story, because we can't ignore it, at least by and large, when we tell the story of folks who look like me, it is always through the lens of slavery, not joy, not genius, not justice, as if my story only begins, as if the stories of folk who look like me only begins when white folk get involved. We fail to critique a system of carnage, exploitation, and domination. And as I've continued to and will continue to reflect on these things, the lesson for me is that we have work to do in establishing the value of we over me. Community has yet to be realized, the ideal of community. If you've been following me for any amount of time, you've heard me say this, and I mean it. Community happens when I make your problem my problem. I literally drove my son to school this morning, and he had not heard about the results of the election. And he turns to me unprompted and says, "Dad, who won?" And I have to tell him, Donald Trump. He looks at me with the most confused look in his eye and says, "Are you serious?" "Yes, son." And unfortunately, we didn't have more time in the car to really grapple with it. And we'll talk about it later tonight. But my son is one of many who are now one of many students, children who are now grappling with the decisions that folks have made in a society that they're trying to navigate, understand, and make sense of. And when I think about this idea of community and the idea that we have yet to make your problem my problem, I feel like it must be said. Black girls, I am sorry. I'm sorry that you could be the most educated people group and yet the country still would not accept you. I'm sorry that the fact that you have every right to be angry will be used and weaponized against you as the trope that it is. I am sorry that men again have put gas prices and groceries before you. I'm sorry that America has failed to live up to its promise to you. I am sorry that yet again we have our young boys who will look at how men have responded in this moment and feel like it's okay. I'm sorry that it just wasn't enough. So, educators who will listen, I'm going to ask you to please hold space for our babies. Help them to navigate their disappointment, their confusion. And if you are an educator of folks who are happy with this decision, hold space for them as well to be able to grapple with the differences and why someone might arrive at disappointment and fear in the face of this decision. And when the time is right, encourage us to hope. And when I say hope, I want to be really careful here because I'm talking about a critical hope. When we talk about hope, it's usually in this form of this traditional sense of hope where it is passive, it is overly optimistic. Critical hope is rooted in a realistic understanding of social injustice. It fuels meaningful action rather than relying on this passive positivity. A while back, I had the opportunity to speak at Florida Gulf Coast University, and we talked about how there were just these enemies of hope. This kind of hokey hope that is knowing about the inequities of our world but doing nothing about it. This mythical hope that some of us maybe fell into with this election, where we believe that a single event, like potentially electing the first Black South Asian woman to the highest office in the land, would solve systemic issues. And bef- before you hear that and go in, I'm not suggesting that you or others believe that. I'm just saying that that is a potential, right? That we could have put a lot of hope and stock in what this decision would have meant to the progress of America. But not only do we have hokey and mythical hope, but there's also this hope deferred. This is when we recognize issues, but we deflect the responsibility for change. We point outside of us. The problem always exists external to us, and it's never us. And these enemies lead to the negative emotions that I'm sure we are all feeling in this moment: a fear, isolation, despair. For some of us, it might be apathy. And it robs us of the opportunity to push for long term, sustained change. So, what do we need in this moment? I'm going to remind us of things that we know. It's not going to be amazingly profound. We need love. And it's going to sound cliche, but here's what I mean. We need to act with empathy and purpose rather than fear. Understand that we cannot critique the systems of our world without acknowledging that folks who feel different in this moment are also people who are entwined in the systems we critique. Much like pain in the body, it alerts us to something deeper. So, folks who are saying the most egregious, toxic things online with regard to how Kamala got to this position, things I won't dare repeat on this program, understand that they are alerting us to the issues that exist behind their statements. They're alerting us to misogyny being a deep seated issue. They're alerting us to sexism. They're alerting us to racism that continues to be perpetuated in our society. Love keeps us grounded in the fact that, as Cornel West has stated, right, justice is what love looks like in public. So I push for justice because I know the people who are saying these vile things are in need of it as well. And even though it kind of gets a bad rap, one of the things that we must continue to do is we need to continually channel our anger. Anger is an ally when properly channeled. When anger leads to action and not detachment. Don't get me wrong. In this moment, you might need space. You might need to unplug. You might need to make sure um, that you just turn off access to any and all social media. And that might be what you need to process in this moment. But the anger you might feel at the results of this election cycle should lead you to greater purpose for change. And in so doing, the hope is that it would lead to community, that we would find support rather than isolation. Every single backlash or white lash, as Van Jones said, every single push against progress is intended to isolate us, to make us feel levels of despair. And community helps ground us in the work we have yet ahead of us, because some of us still got to go back to work. You still got to look your son or daughter in the eye and explain the world as much as you can to them. And we're going to need each other for the work ahead. But not only that, struggle is an ally of hope. And when I say this, it's going to sound weird to some folks, but I don't believe that these inequalities, these inequities that we rightly critique are going to be solved in my lifetime. But here's what I know: if I don't work for change, they won't be solved in my children's or their grandchildren's. That is going to take sustained work over a long time. And we're going to continuously experience loss and doubt. But that does not make the work any less worth it. So choose to struggle. Struggle is worth it because it alerts us to the work still yet to be done. It helps us find community, and it helps us find love and joy, even in the midst of things like doubt and despair and anger and all the things that we might feel in this moment. So, educator, what is the call that rests on your shoulders? The first thing is we have to recognize the accountability that is needed. As we reflect, we got to continue to act on our role for fostering equitable environments. Equity's become a buzzword, and we've kind of lost sight of where it goes. And traditional statements like giving each child what they need are too vague to really act on. So I really am borrowing from the work of Dr. Paul Gorski and the Equity Literacy Institute when I say that transformational equity means that we are actively searching for the inequities that exist in our school, all the isms, racism, classism, heterosexism, and the like, and we're working to uproot them at its core, at its root. That we can no longer be folk who are fine with just mitigating equity. You know, the proverbial like whack-a-mole, where we're continuing to bat down different things as it rises up. Like when we're cool with just plucking the branches off off the tree when they grow too far and they get in our way, but we don't want to uproot the tree. It is our role to foster these equitable environments. It is also our role to share or divest of power. In this moment, our students are going to feel like their thoughts and emotions are not going to matter. That they could feel like, oh, America's going to do what's right in this moment, and then wake up today and feel extreme levels of disappointment. Help them to foster a sense of resolve by encouraging their voices and helping them to see that their voice belongs. Not only that, but they should be central to the decisions that we make in the classroom. That if you make decisions for your students and you decide to do things to your students, that you're not doing things with them. And with is the operative word. Encourage conversation, dialogue, facilitate conversations across differences to build understanding and commitment. As I write this, I'm looking at the posts of a former student of mine who has posted like a cover photo of Trump driving a trash can, talking about he's going to clean up the last 4 years. And while it's completely his right to feel, I can't help but wonder if I had done more work in terms of helping the curriculum, even math, right? Because we could default to numbers and number sense, but helping my students to see their world through these numbers and the things we do to make sense of data. If I did more in that way, maybe he would see, even if this is the decision that he welcomed, how it is hurting others. I could just chalk it up to, oh, well, this is his choice, but I'm choosing to see the responsibility that I might have in growing as an educator. And I hope that you do the same. Perhaps I could have facilitated more conversations between he and others who might feel different in this moment. Women who feel like their bodily autonomy was taken and validated. That decision was validated by the reelection of 47th president of these yet to be United States of America. So we have to continuously reflect and act to create equitable environments. We have to divest of power. We have to facilitate conversations, difficult conversations, but we also have to prioritize healing. And that begins with self, but also holding space for our students. Prioritize well being and resilience, understanding that this work requires us to sustain ourselves. So maybe you don't need to talk about it in this moment. Maybe you need time to really reflect and heal, process. Please take the time you need. But understand that this work is the work ahead of us requires us to be well. So teach with a critical lens. Help students understand that we're all going to encounter barriers, right? We are going to encounter resistance. But true hope requires not only an awareness of problems, but action towards solution. That true education is awareness and action. Encourage students to lead initiatives. How are they making sense of these decisions? And what do they want to do to facilitate something new? Create a new normal in your school environment. Let them choose the topics that matter to them. Supplement the curriculum or the curricular resources. The reason that I am big on my staff seeing the standards as the curriculum is so that they have the freedom and flexibility to be able to supplement the curricular resource. The book will never teach all the standards because curricular resources will never fix a problem that they profit from. So the curricular resource will teach you a set of skills, but not all the skills you need to exceed the expectation of the state assessment. So that when you don't get that, now you need remediation. And those same people who made the book to begin with now make the book to help you at the end. I'm not going to fix a problem that I profit from. I'm going to continue to exploit the student for my profit. And so we need a critical lens that helps our students to be able to navigate that and supplement their own learning by making it meaningful to them. We need to develop and cultivate allies of hope in the classroom, creating supportive environments filled with love, community, and constructive struggle. This is where we help folks, our students, to stay engaged despite the setbacks. And not only that, we model what it looks like to have a reflective praxis. To use reflective practices. So journaling, discussions, check-ins, allowing students to express emotions and respond to challenges productively. The emotional regulation that we want to see in our students should begin with us as educators. And sometimes, more times than not, it's not modeled properly, but we have the expectation that students respond properly. Let's be educators that actually use these reflective practices. So, as I think about the task that's ahead of us, I think about these next 4 years. I, I think it's incumbent upon us to process, to heal, but to build our capacity for hope. And I don't hope or choose hope as a mask for the pain that I feel in this moment, for the confusion that I have in this moment. I choose hope, knowing that things may not fix themselves in my lifetime, but the work is still worth it. Educator, my hope is that you would find yourself in the same process, that you would choose hope, knowing what's in front of us. That, better yet, let me say it this way. And I've used this analogy before, but I think it's helpful in this moment. My favorite Disney movie is Mulan. And in Mulan, they challenge um, gender roles. And in effort to protect her family, Mulan cuts her hair and listens to the army and goes to fight the Hun. And as she's training, there is this one obstacle that the commander of the troops has in front of everyone. He takes this arrow, he shoots it at the top of this pole and says, you have these two weights to carry. And I forget exactly what he names them, but it says you have these two weights to carry and you got to carry them up to get to the top of this arrow, to retrieve this arrow from the top of this pole. And all the men are trying to carry it up, use brute strength and force. And Mulan was the only one smart enough to recognize, if I take this weight and wrap it around the pole, that they will serve as counterbalances to help me meet my purpose. What I'm saying is, take what you know, that this decision has really shown us the ugliness that is yet still to be eradicated in America, that people have very hard lines in the sand in terms of their differences, and we have yet to really understand each other, build true community, that the systems are continuing to work as intended, that we've been failed by a two-party system, all the things that we can name. You hold that in one hand, but in the other hand, you still have access to the anger that you might feel that can be fueled towards action, that you recognize that we stand on the shoulders of giants who have encountered resistance to progress, and still held on to hope, that you take all of that in this hand and you use both of those things to propel us to our purpose. Understand that hope is worth it, but it's a critical hope that recognizes what's ahead of us. So, educator, as you process, as you continue to heal and grow from this moment, do you have no other community? You have one here. Until next time, y'all, let's keep pushing.